This is breaking news.
Happening right now, the NYPD is holding a press conference regarding Election Day preparations here in the city. Let's listen in.
With me here today, I have the Chief of the Operations Division, Ray Spinella, and I have the Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism, John Miller. Everyone knows John. All right, so good afternoon. Across the nation, we hold voting as a sacred right for every American. Here at the NYPD, ensuring that every New Yorker is safe while they cast their ballot is a top priority. As we continue to facilitate peaceful protests across the city, currently we have no known threats of disruptions, and we do not expect any during the course of the next few weeks. But let me be clear. The NYPD is fully prepared to protect every person's right to vote. We will have members of the NYPD at the 1,201 polling locations across the 5 boroughs on Election Day, and at the 88 locations in the city that will host early voting that begins on Saturday. Of the 1,201 locations, 708 will be located at public schools, and there are 3 new locations that we will secure this year: the Barclays Center, Madison Square Garden, and Lincoln Center. It is no secret that this election is more contentious than in years past. For that reason, our plan also includes the ability to respond to any type of incident that may occur. Beginning on October 26th, we will have hundreds of additional cops in uniform citywide who will be at the ready should they be needed. And each of these officers will be briefed daily with any information that might affect voting locations. We also want to keep the public informed, so please follow the NYPD's Twitter account @NYPD News for related updates. Just like any other major event in our city, planning for this did not begin yesterday. We've had tabletop exercises, reviewed the response to past demonstration, and refreshed training for our cops on the ground. For 175 years, New York's finest have kept this city safe through every type of major event imaginable. The next 2 weeks leading up to Election Day and beyond will be absolutely no different. Our men and women in blue will continue to be there for every New Yorker, fighting crime, answering calls for service, and ready to immediately respond to any type of incident. To all of them, thank you for what you do every day, especially in the face of great challenges. I'll open it up to questions.
So what do you see is different from past elections? Has anything changed in the whole scenario?
Listen, we look at what's going on around the country, what's happened over the city, so we're more prepared. We've done more training after what occurred earlier this year, but we don't expect anything different than what's happened at every election, every presidential election that we've monitored over the years. So we don't expect anything different, and we will be out there in case anything should change.
Than it was in prior years? What are you more aware of or alert to?
We looked at how we respond quickly to incidences, so we've had training, getting our cops to locations quicker, mobilizing from around the city. That's what Chief Raymond Spinella has been put in charge of to coordinate. We also trained our cops. That was one of the issues we saw. We want to be better trained. How do we deal with crowd control? The average patrol cop on the street responding as a team for crowd control, we wanted to retrain them in all the various techniques that are available to them.
I know you said you don't expect anything different, but what do you think is your biggest threat at this point? Are we talking about people hijacking protests? Are we talking about polling place issues? What do you think?
We don't see any threat at this point. Listen, we've been dealing with demonstrations, multiple demonstrations every day of the week this summer, and we've responded to it. We don't expect anything different coming up. We've been handling it. The men and women are out there each and every day. We're getting better and better at it. John Miller and his team with intelligence has been coming up with everything. We see no threats or anything changing over the course of the next couple of weeks.
A question for Commissioner Miller, if possible. Commissioner, if you could describe the intelligence gathering process and what you have come up with in the days ahead of the election with regard to polling and protests.
Sure. So to reiterate what Terry said, right now we have no specific credible threat regarding this election vis-a-vis New York City or Election Day in particular. But we're set up to receive any reports of voter intimidation or fraud. We work very closely with the Board of Elections on these things. I would add that this election, and this is very logical from recent historical experience, is being closely guarded against for cyber attacks. We followed very closely reports of cyber activity that's been detected as suspicious in other states. We factor all of that into the intelligence picture, not in a passive way, but in a very active way, down to IP addresses, suspicious activity, and so on, that we load into our systems to guard against. We work with New York City Cyber Command. The FBI Cyber Division will be running a cyber command post in the background to make sure that we're monitoring all systems against anything that could be election fraud, election tampering, but also de rigueur ransomware, DDoS attacks, and other forms. And that's going to be with the Board of Elections, with the FBI, with the NYPD intelligence cyber people, with New York City Cyber Command all together in one place. I think other than that, you know, what Terry said is we've also practiced this out. A couple of weeks ago, we did a tabletop exercise that covered not just Election Day as we know it, but remember, we're in a period where we have early voting, where we did a 3 or 4 day run up to Election Day and the day after, and we threw every kind of incident you could imagine at it. Natural disasters, protests, violence, suspicious packages, explosive devices, and again, we don't have any information or suspect that we're going to have any of those things in particular, but based on what Ray's been working on, which is the ability to rapidly mobilize personnel, move them from place to place, and make sure we have adequate coverage, we wanted to kind of test all of those synapses to see that they're firing properly. So that's what we're looking at.
Thank you. Chief, hi.
Hi.
Will you have police officers at every polling site? I know you typically have not. And then secondly, do you think cops can be unbiased when the PBA has backed Donald Trump?
Yes, there'll be uniformed members of the department, whether they're police officers, school safety officers, at every polling location. And listen, when we put on this uniform, we are apolitical. We have no stance one way or another, one role, and that's to keep people safe, make sure anyone can come in and vote. So there'll be no instances of police officers using their political opinions. We are apolitical in this thing.
How you doing, Chief?
Hey, Aga.
Will there be any plans for the days following the election in case there's no result that day?
Absolutely. We plan every day. Meetings between Chief Spinella, myself, Intel, talking about what we're hearing, what's the ground up, are there any demonstrations, and we respond. We've been doing this all summer long, and obviously we're going to have to continue it past the election. But things have gotten a lot calmer here around the city. The protests that were thousands upon thousands have gone down to groups of a few hundred, and that's what we're hoping continues at this point.
Hey, Chief. Given that you're planning for these potential massive protests, last month the mayor said that any arrests, need to have during protest activity need to have clear guidance and usable ground rules. So, what's the NYPD's current directives on when to make arrests during protests, and are you going to release this to the public beforehand?
This is what we always do. When there's a protest that's peaceful, we facilitate these protests. If violence starts occurring, if damage to public property starts occurring, at that point, the commander on the ground will make a decision whether or not to make arrests and who to arrest. Obviously, we don't want to arrest everyone. We want people to be able to protest, but we also don't want to see our city damaged.
Hi, I just wanted to know if there's any more details that we could get on monitoring polling places during early voting. I know that you said there's 88. And then also, I know that you don't have any intelligence right now of any group doing anything during Election Day, but if there's a group that's maybe asked by one or whatever the political leaders to stand back and stand by, is there an example of what you guys might do to prevent that?
We're going to have officers at each one of the 88 sites prior to the early voting sites. We'll have some more officers at the 3 major locations. So there will be a presence everywhere people come to vote. And no matter when, whether it's Election Day, early, if anyone tries to interfere with people's right to vote, we will take action. That's why we have police officers on the scene. You know, we are impartial, but we will not allow anyone to interfere with any American's right to come out and vote.
Afternoon, Chief.
Hey, Rock.
Chief, are you more likely, or are you more likely at this point expecting small skirmishes at individual polling places or larger demonstrations, A? And B, have any groups applied for a sound permit or a demo permit at this point?
No. Nothing has been applied for. We don't expect any skirmishes. We don't expect any large demonstrations. We expect this to go like any other election does. I don't see any reason for anyone to try and affect people's right to vote. This is what America's all about, letting people get out there and vote. So we're not expecting it. If it were to occur, we're ready to respond.
I know you said at the beginning of the press conference that you had reviewed how the NYPD had responded to other demonstrations. I wondered, when you looked at the way you responded to past demonstrations, what were the lessons learned? How will you do it differently if there are demonstrations either before, during, or after Election Day?
We want to be able to respond quicker, get our personnel to scenes faster. That's the main mission that Chief Spinella has been in charge of, is learning how to mobilize, knowing where our personnel are, where our cops are in every nook and cranny in the department. So if we were able to need more cops on the street quickly, we'll be able to get them. And a lot of cops hadn't received disorder training since they first came on the job. So it was important that we retrained these police officers and just the basics of disorder control training. So that's been the main difference.
Could I ask just a couple of questions? John, I wanted to ask you, we've heard complaints in places like Michigan and Wisconsin about paramilitary groups intimidating voters. Are we more concerned about something like that or some kind of intimidation to voters in New York? Or it sounds more like there is concern about the potential for violence in some of these large protests if the president decides not to leave the White House if he loses the election. And I also wanted to ask Terry, if I could, I know you said that there's no, or John, that there's no evidence that you have of anything that's askew, that you're worried about something, that everything is fine so far. But then why are we having this briefing? I don't mean to be smart about that, but why are we having this briefing? Because I've been here 21 years in New York City. I've never can recall
all right, so
like
let me go backwards,
okay,
which is we're having this briefing because numerous media outlets, and if you want the list, you can have it, requested it. And rather than do 25 interviews, it just seemed to be easier to say, let's get everybody in one place and see what the range of questions are. Are we expecting any of the things on your list of the possible parade of terribles? No. Are we going to be prepared for any of them? Yes. And, you know, from an intel standpoint, I just got to reiterate, we have no specific credible threat, but we're aware of things that have occurred in other states. We're aware of contentious relations, and we are relying on two things. One, that from the extreme left to the extreme right, both seem to agree that everybody needs to vote. So we're hoping that actually helps us. And two, if something happens, that we have the adequate resources and the speedy response to deal with it quickly. We've been policing elections for 175 years. It's required by law that a police officer be at every polling station. We want to be very careful not to either over-police, in that could send a signal, or under-police. People should see, as required by law, a police officer at a polling place so that they have someone to bring to their attention anything that's untoward. And then that police officer, in most cases, calls for a supervisor and consults with the Board of Election, and then they decide what to do. Not the first rodeo as far as elections go, and in my experience, in most cases where there's either electioneering or a protest or something that's closer than 100 feet from a polling place, when we've asked them to disperse as the police, in most cases that's happened, but we want to be prepared.
I notice the emphasis is that there's no credible threat again and again, but I wonder, as of the 26th of October, that's when you're going to deploy like hundreds of additional cops out there. I wonder what specific instructions you have given them other than a normal, tour or duty. And also, for that matter, the public, what should be aware about and what way they can help you, police.
As we always do when we do elections, we advise our cops their job is to maintain the peace, to allow people to come in and vote without being harassed, to prevent any electioneering within 100 feet of the polling site. That is their message. That is their mission that day. To the public, have no fear. Come out and vote. It is a privilege as an American to come out and vote. Everyone should come out and place their vote that day. Have no fear about going into an election site. We will be there, and we will make sure everyone is safe. First off, the lootings happened in the first couple of days of the Floyd protest. We've been handling protests since then without incident, without any looting, and we've gotten better and better at how we respond. There is nothing that should indicate to us that that would ever occur again. But if it did, if it tried, we would be on it, and we would be able to put it out quite quickly. What was the second part of the question again?
About how they are organizing, thank you, about how they're organizing with, encryption and apps and on social media.
Our intelligence division is probably the best in the world. We gather information from a lot of different sources, and we've been very good at knowing what's going on. And no matter how they try to defeat us, we've been able to stay on top of it, and that's how we've been able to keep the city safe from protests throughout the summer and make sure that people who want to peacefully protest get so to do, and we will facilitate those.
Take another question from Tina. Chief, just to go back to what I asked before regarding all the polling stations having police officers present, that's new, correct? Because in my nearly 20 years, I don't remember that.
We're mandated to have police officers at everything by law. We have members of our department present at every polling station.
Are you ramping it up this year?
And have been. I'm on 39 years. Every polling site is supposed to have a cop at it.
Okay. Thank you.
Chief, I wondered if you were going to take any special precautions involving Trump Tower, if there'll be any street closures or any special things Election Day or the day after Election Day.
Every action we take is related to the intelligence we receive and what happens on the ground. Again, it's a matter of responding quickly to anything that occurs. This is what we do. There have been protests at Trump Tower. Sometimes we've had to shut the streets. Sometimes we haven't. But we will have cops ready to deploy. Teams will be out there. If anything happens, we will be able to quickly mass and be able to take care of it.
We have time for one or two more questions, Mr. Chapman. Yeah.
So are the staffing levels going to be identical to previous years, or are there going to be more officers out, is the first question. The second question is, are you expecting a normal number of people going to the polls, given that we're in a pandemic, or are we thinking that there might be fewer people than usual?
We will have more police officers out. At the locations, it'll be basically the same at the polling locations, but we will have teams available that Chief Spinella has put together that can respond quickly throughout the city if there's an incident. So if there's a problem at any location, that officer on the location can quickly have a team come and respond. You know, we're going to be prepared for a regular turnout. This is a presidential election. It is one that is highly talked about, where everyone is encouraged to come out and vote. So even though there's early voting, there's mail-in voting, we are preparing as if this is going to be a very heavy turnout, and we hope it is.
You guys can decide which of you answer questions. Doyle or Mark,
Go ahead.
Chief, I'm sorry. With the recent cap on overtime, is that going to affect the deployment of police officers in any way in this NYPD's budget?
Listen, part of our budget is to make sure the city is safe. If we need to put personnel out there to make sure it's safe, it'll be part of the overtime budget that we have to work through. So we'll make adjustments elsewhere, but we're not going to cut down on having a coverage out on the street and have to worry about the safety of people in New York.
Thank you, everybody.
I just want to know the numbers. I just am confused about the numbers. You said there would be several hundred cops doing this, but then you need 1,200 cops at the polling site. So what's the number of cops?
I said there's 1,201 polling sites that we will be covering. So they'll be at the 1,201 polling sites, plus we will have additional police officers in teams that can respond if there are any instances. So there'll be a lot of cops out there.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was confused.